Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Brendan Glasheen. Good to be back with Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. We're here for best bets on this week's UFC card, UFC Fight Night with Lemos and Jandiroba as the headline fight, the women's strawweight main event at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. We'll dive right in. Sean Zerillo, the main event features, again, Lemos and Jandiroba. Looking at the current line right now, Lemos at plus 114, Jandiroba at minus 135. Overall breakdown of this women's strawweight as far as how it might go and how you'd like to bet it.
I think it's interesting to see the under, or the ends inside the distance, juiced to minus 200 for a women's strawweight fight. Now, this is a relatively binary fight. Jandiroba, the better grappler. Lemos, the better striker. Lemos can grapple a little bit, and she has some decent submission skills as well. But typically, women's strawweight bouts go to a decision as 66% clip. 2/3 of them reach a decision. You can adjust for the Apex. Apex fights end inside the distance about 12 to 15% more than your regular size octagon. So take 12%, take 15% away from the 66%. You're still at 51%. Take another 5% away for them being binary, right? For a striker, relatively striker versus grappler fight where finishes tend to be a little bit higher, you get down to 45%. You're still not down to that 40% implied mark at plus 150 for the fight to reach a decision. So I kind of like the goes to decision at plus 150. I think I'd prefer the over 3.5 rounds at minus 115 because I could see Virna getting a late finish here. And I know that's kind of how Billy is betting it as well. I've seen some takes this week talking about Lemos as the live side. I could not disagree more. Virna has proven her 5-round cardio. She has an Invicta title fight from 2018 against Mizuki Inoue. Mizuki, now a UFC fighter with credible UFC wins. Split decision, to me, it was a clear 49-46 or 50-45 for Virna. I think she showed great cardio and tenacity in the championship round. She showed that she can carry her cardio and continue to grapple and wrestle and stay on top of opponents for 25 minutes. She's really like a dog on the bone when she gets that single leg. And even her UFC fights where she's lost, her fight against Mackenzie Dern, she let Dern up late in the fight. If she had stayed down on, maintained top position, I think she wins that fight. She has another close 29-28 loss against a fighter who we constantly back. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name here. Amanda Ribas, where Virna won the first round, couldn't land takedowns in rounds 2 and 3. But Ribas, judo black belt, good grappler in her own right. We've seen Lemos get taken down by opponents. We've seen her tire out late in the fight, and we've seen her stay on her back as she gets tired and shown an unwillingness to get up. So there could be slight difficulty for the judges in some rounds here judging damage against control because Virna, even when she gets to opposition, doesn't necessarily prioritize ground and pound. She's looking to keep her opponents flat on their back, and she's really strong and she's good at maintaining top position, especially for, a strawweight. Like she's very strong at keeping her opponents down, which you don't typically see in the 115-pound division. But in the same respect, as Lemos tires, she tends to accept those positions and lay on her back. So I think Lemos is going to be dangerous here early, as she typically is. But as this fight goes, I think I prefer her tenacity. I think I prefer her cardio, and I think I prefer her style for winning minutes down the stretch of this fight. So I'm a little bit interested at minus 130 pre-fight, but I wouldn't bet it past that. I projected this closer to minus 140. I'm going to try to wait for a better number. If I can, I'd probably prefer like minus 120 on Virna pre-fight. But in the same respect, I can't imagine a scenario where you don't get a better live price after rounds 1 or round 2. I feel like Lemos almost has to win one of the first 2 rounds here, given the stylistic matchup and her striking and, her strength. And she's just very dynamic and very powerful. And I feel like it's almost a given that she's going to win one of the first 2 rounds, if not both of them, unless Virna finishes her. So live after round 1 or after round 2 on Virna at a better price than 130, which you can get pre-fight. And then also the over 3.5 rounds at minus 115, as I said, or the goes to decision at plus 150. That's how I'm looking to play this fight. And I think the live angle on Virna might be the best of the bunch.
Seeing some 2.5 rounds, Zerillo, like juice to the over. Is that? Do you not play? Do you have a price point? I'm assuming on that, or would you rather play the 3.5?
Yeah, I think I'd rather play the 3.5 at -110 instead of the 2.5 at -190. That's a big discrepancy in the pricing between the 2.5 and the 3.5. I guess the market is, thinking like Virna never been 5-round or never been in a 5-round fight in the UFC. But going back watching that Invicta fight, even though it's from 5-6 years ago, I'm pretty confident that she's going to be able to maintain her style across 25 minutes. And also, I should mention too, having the smaller cage in the apex, I think helps her more than it helps Lemos. Like being able to pursue that grappling, getting into clinch positions, getting in tight. I think all of that in the smaller cage sort of helps her. So yeah, the over I think is mispriced given the history of strawweight fights in the UFC, but also they are in the small cage and it's a pretty binary matchup. So I'd rather be taking a less juice priced on it to go longer, because I think if there's a finish here, it's likely a quick Lemos KO or a late Virna submission. I guess an early Virna submission is live as well, but I think it's probably like an inside of 1.5 or a between rounds 3.5 and round 5 the finish comes. I think those middle rounds are a bit safer. So as a result, that's why I'd rather lay the -110, -115 on the 3.5 as opposed to taking the -190 on the 2.5.
Very good. All right, Billy, what say you as far as this women's strawweight goes?
Yeah, we're seeing it pretty similar. I can't believe people are thinking Lemos is the live side here. I guess the only logic or the only way you could get there is if Jandiroba is selling out for takedowns and not getting them. Like I say it all the time, it's tiring to get a takedown, but your reward is you get to kind of chill on top and make your opponent carry your weight. You're spending just as much energy to then be back at the feet where they can punch you is very tiring. That's possible, I suppose. I just don't see it happening, right? I think Jandiroba gets her takedowns. As far as the total, I think I prefer the go to decision over the 3.5. We saw Lemos survive 5 rounds with Weili Zhang somehow. I mean, I've never seen someone take that much damage and make it at a weight class like this before. So I don't see how Jandiroba finds a finish if Zhang was unable to late in the fight, unless, she out techniques her with submissions or something, but she's not really aggressively hunting subs. Typically, she's usually happy to win rounds. With that said, from a pre-fight standpoint, any kind of late angles on Jandiroba, the 4-5 decision split bet is close to +200. Any kind of same game parlay you want to cook up with over a certain number of minutes in Jandiroba, or obviously Virna live. I mostly agree with Sean on that. I said the same thing last week with Rose, and then she won the first 2 rounds pretty easily, and we never really got the opportunity to come back in. So I'm probably going to overcorrect and take a late prop that's +190 when I could have got her live at a better number. Either way, though, I mean, we're seeing the same way. Kind of didn't matter with Rose, even if you paid a higher price after 2 rounds last week, because you only pay the juice when you lose, and she covered pretty easily. I see this, honestly, very similar fight in terms of one fighter's dangerous early. Lemos is far more dangerous than Cortez was early for a lot of reasons. But if we get through that first round or 2, I don't see how Lemos wins this. So, yeah, mostly in lockstep with Sean. A little bit more aggressive, I think, in how I would play how late it's going to go. But other than that, we're on the same page.
Virna in the over 1.5 is about +120. That's about what I'd hope to get live after round 1, like +115, something like that. Round 1, round 2, around there. I'd hope to get between -115 and +115 on her, in a fight that's 1-1 after round 2. That's roughly what I'd target. So it's not bad. Virna in the over 1.5 at +120.
Yeah, and obviously anyone out here listening, you want to make a little bet to try to win a lot, take her by decision. You want to, have a safer option, go over 1 round. You can play with that, especially with the same game parlays and the various betting options out there, to try to adjust for your risk level, how much you want to pursue this, or whether you think you're going to be live watching this one tomorrow on what's not a great card top to bottom. So if you don't want to be up watching it live, that also is a reason to look into some of these props.
Main card is on ESPN2. Oh, ESPN, I beg your pardon. And the prelims are on E2, coming your way on Saturday, the 20th. Okay, let's go to the middleweight fight of the night. Brad Tavares, Jun-yong Park. Latest line here, Park, the favorite at minus 162, Tavares plus 136. Zerillo, how would you how do you assess this fight, break it all down, and how would you like to bet it when all that comes out of the wash?
Yeah, I think it's Tavares or pass given the stylistic nature. Park really doesn't separate when he can't get takedowns on opponents, and Brad Tavares has great takedown defense, 81% for his career. He's also historically very durable, but he's now getting late in his career. I believe he's not been knocked out in his last 2 losses. And Park isn't considered, a guy with one punch KO power, but he has hurt opponents in recent fights. He dropped Albert Duraev before choking him out. He had Gregory Rodriguez very badly hurt, completely on skates in the octagon before Rodriguez charged at him and ended up knocking out Park, which was surprising because Park is generally considered to be extremely durable. His nickname's the Iron Turtle. And given the stylistic nature of Tavares and how he fights and how he keeps most of his fights close, if this goes all 15 minutes, absolutely. It's a Tavares as the side in terms of going to be more competitive than plus 135. It's probably a pure coin flip if they kickbox for 15 minutes. And I would probably consider betting Tavares in decision-only markets. I'm curious what his decision-only price would be. If it's around, an even pricing, I think that would be a potential play as well, just because, as I said, I give them a pretty equal chance of winning a decision. I have the decision-only line right here, and Brad is plus 110. So I think that might be the way to play him, decision-only at plus 110 as opposed to money line plus 135, because I'm going to bet Park to win by knockout at plus 480 or inside the distance at plus 250. I just think the trajectories of their careers, Brad coming off of the recent knockout, not sure how he's going to look after that, and just absorbing damage worse as he wears on longer in his career. So I think if you're going to bet Park, I wouldn't bet the money line. I would go ahead and bet his finish props, as I said, KO plus 480, inside the distance plus 250. And if you like Tavares, I would bet him on the decision only money line at plus 110.
Okay, Billy, you're more willing though to go to the money line price. Why? For Tavares?
I am, and largely just because I think it does go to a decision, so I want the extra 25 cents of payout. Sean makes a ton of sense. I don't hate that. I'm just getting a little greedy on the plus 136. We talked off air. I didn't do a luck ratings this week. I took a little time off with the MLB All-Star break. This is one that certainly would have featured in there, because if you look at the last handful of fights for Park, he's 4-1 in his last 5. One of those was a gift split decision over Eric Anders that I think Sean and I both bet on Anders in that fight, if I recall correctly. And we're both a little bit annoyed at how that one went. And then he has 3 finishes over extremely lower tier UFC guys. I believe the guys he beat outside of Anders are 4-9 combined in the promotion. In Park, historically, he's looked really good against guys who he can take down and are lower level UFC fighters. Tavares is neither one of those things, right? He's mid-tier, I think, at this point in his career, but has fought some tough guys. Most of his losses are against ranked opponents or guys who were ranked at the time. And as Sean pointed out, excellent takedown defense. So unless you think Park really sees an uptick in power, he's got 0 knockout wins in the UFC, 1 knockdown in 10 fights. I see that angle, and at the price you're getting that, I'm not going to, hit on Sean for that. Yeah, it's probably more likely than the plus 400 or whatever he's getting. But I don't think it's likely enough that it's going to push me off the Tavares money line and onto the decision only. I think he's a better technical fighter. He's going to win more minutes on the feet. He might drop a moment or two to Park, but typically we reward the fighter who wins most of the round in situations like that, unless he's badly hurt. And again, yeah, we've seen Tavares badly hurt, but it's against guys like G-Rod, Bruno Silva, high-level strikers are very dangerous guys, at least that have proven that a lot more than Jun-yong Park has in his UFC career.
All right. Excellent. There are your breakdowns for the main event and the fight of the night. That's the men's middleweight, Tavares and Jun-yong Park. Let's head to underdogs. How is the week for dogs this week, Sean?
Didn't find many that I love, but also there's a lot of fights that are fairly closely lined. We don't have a lot of don't have any minus 400 favorites on this card. The biggest favorite is Miranda Maverick at minus 215. So a lot of plant your flag fights, which is good. As I said, not a lot of underdogs that I like, but a few at around pick 'em prices. One of which would be Lucy Pudilova, who you can get at plus 100 even money, but you can also bet her to about minus 110, minus 115. This is Pudilova's second UFC stint. And prior to rejoining the UFC, and then also since rejoining the UFC, she's shown a lot more urgency in terms of pursuing grappling. She's prioritized and proactively tried to take opponents down. She's also facing an opponent in Luana Carolina who, one, doesn't have great grappling. Her takedown defense has improved, but once you put Carolina down, she's a bad grappler. Number two, and I think more importantly, Carolina isn't really used to size parity. She's faced a lot of fighters in the division who are notably smaller than her. And I mean, even some of the ones who are smaller than her have completely outgrappled her, like Molly McCann. But I mean, Carolina typically used to having a pretty significant reach advantage, like 4 or 5 inches of reach on her opponents, a few inches of height. She's 2 inches shorter than Pudilova. She does have a 2-inch reach advantage, but the way Pudilova is going to fight here, it's probably not going to matter to a significant degree. Even if these two strike it out for 15 minutes, I'd still make Pudilova like 40% in this matchup. I think she can stay relatively competitive in the striking match, but she has all the grappling upside here too. She may only need 1 takedown to win the fight. She more likely needs 1 takedown in each round to win the fight, or at least 1 in separate rounds to secure at least 2 of the 3 rounds. But yeah, I think Pudilova plus money, all of the grappling upside, and showing a different style than she has in her prior UFC run. I think she's a little bit undervalued on the money line. Going back to Billy's luck ratings, I know he said he didn't write it up this week, but I'd have to imagine Pudilova would have popped up, considering, as I said, she's 1-2 in her second stint in the UFC, but one of those losses was to Jocelyn Edwards, where all 15 media members and 88% of fan scorecards gave the decision to Pudilova. Somehow, Edwards won a 29-28 split, and that's one of the worst scorecards of the past few years. So I think Pudilova also a bit unlucky in terms of, her results, and I think people wiki capping this, just looking at the record, it's very easy to overlook the fact that she probably won that fight against Edwards, and it's just fighting in a different style and looks much better in this stint. So Pudilova, my favorite underdog, plus money, favorite pick'em aside from my best bet. And then I just want to co-sign to a degree on one of Billy's picks with Haider Emil. I'm probably going to be betting Emil pre-fight and then live betting against him after round 1.
Okay. All right, Billy, go ahead with Emil first, and then we'll go to your next one.
Yeah, I was going to give Sean a hard time about putting a plus 100 fight as his underdog, and then he was nice to me about my pick, so I'm going to not do that, even though I just kind of did. But, yeah, Haider Emil versus, Jun-yong Lee. I just don't understand how you confidently say either of these fighters is a heavy favorite in this. They've both looked really, really good against pretty bad competition. Neither of them has fought anyone that I would say is super high level. Jun-yong Lee is 11-1. He won the road to the UFC last year and then got into the UFC formally with a win over Yi Jia. That was a split decision win. I think I would have given him the win too, but it's one that you wouldn't have been mad about really either way, having watched that fight back. So he's got 1 fight against an actual UFC fighter. He won a decision against Blake Bilder. Haider Emil is 9-0, looked right in the Contender Series. His UFC debut was against Fernie Garcia, who took it on like 3 days' notice. And Haider Emil looked great, picked him apart on the feet, standing TKO, everything you could ask for. And yet he's plus 160, as high as plus 165 here. I think this fight, from a pre-fight standpoint, should be a lot closer. As Sean pointed out, Jun-yong Lee probably going to look better down the stretch. Haider Emil probably going to look better early. Even that, though, it's hard to say confidently because we haven't seen him really pushed by a guy that we would normally consider UFC level. There's a chance both these guys stick around in the UFC and look at home in these divisions. There's a chance neither of them do. We'll get a little bit more information about that here. And then Haider Emil plus 165. If you get Lee coming back at any point live plus money or close to it, I'll probably arbitrage out with that. Lock in a profit either way. That's how I'm looking at this one. Other one I like, Thomas Peterson, is plus 110 against Muhammad Usman. Peterson was a 2-time state champion wrestler in high school, national junior college champion, I should say, not NCAAs. Usman has never even faced a takedown attempt in the UFC against any of his opponents, which I think has been by design in terms of matchmaking. Obviously, with his last name, they're trying to make something out of Muhammad Usman. They always need heavyweights. They need a guy that we've at least heard of his brother. That's kind of the end of it here with Peterson, who lost his UFC debut. could have been some pre-fight or UFC debut jitters. I'm kind of willing to look past that. If he can wrestle and take Usman down early, he's got a really good shot here. And then Usman just doesn't finish anyone. His only UFC finish was against Zach Pauga on the Tough finale. You guys have heard me talk about what I think about recent seasons of Tough. And Pauga was just a chubby 205er who wanted to be on the show and then immediately went down to 205.
And he was winning that whole fight too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was the only guy that... Right. And it just, Usman doesn't, as big and strong and scary as he looks, he doesn't seem to have true heavyweight power. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't really have any elite skills, where we've got one guy who might not be great overall, but he's got one thing he can do. And he should probably have, Peterson should probably have about 20, 25 pounds on Usman, I guess. When the
261 is his listed weight? Holy crap.
For which guy?
Peterson.
Yeah, I think Usman's usually has been at least coming in a little bit on the lighter side for heavyweight. I don't see him getting Peterson often, basically, is my point, once Peterson gets down there. So, again, if it looks like Peterson is gassing out going for takedowns, but one around, just like the other fight, if I could arbitrage this by coming back on the other side, I absolutely will. I wanted to be on the Peterson plus 3.5, because even when Usman wins, decisions are not that clear. Books have caught up to that. They made that minus 190. So they know that this is likely to be 29-28 someone, which means obviously when we think that's going to happen, we'll take the plus money side.
Okay, very good. They're your dogs for this week. Let's go to the prop market. Where are we looking this week, Sean?
A couple late props, Bill LJO, round 2 and round 3 against Yuho Choi, the Korean Superboy. Choi has not won a fight in the UFC in 8 years. Layoff for military service, came back. Pretty competitive in his last fight with Colin Nelson, but this is a guy who 9 of his 14 career wins have come inside of round 1. He typically fades after round 1, and Bill LJO on the other side typically builds into rounds 2 and rounds 3. So I think Choi, clear pre-fight side, likely to win round 1. LJO, clear live bet after round 1, likely at a better price. And then his round 2 prop at plus 1,000, his round 3 prop at plus 1,500, respectively, in the smaller cage in the Apex. Senor Perfecto going to pick it up down the stretch and hopefully find a late finish here. But I think the live bet, certainly the best way to play it. I'll have some sprinkles, though, on the 10-1 and 15-1 late props, respectively, too.
Okay, Billy, what do you got for props?
Yeah, love Sean's. I was going to use one of those for Prop Squad until I saw him put this in this piece. And I might still if Sean's not doing it. But, I mean, it's the obvious. That's how he finishes people. It's by hitting them many times, not hard. Right, he doesn't hit you once hard; he hits you over and over and over. So, love that. I'm looking at Steve Garcia. I'm kind of torn between inside the distance at even money and knockout at plus 125. The knockout is obviously far more likely. I don't know if Garcia's ever won a fight by submission. He has not in the UFC, but he has 5 knockdowns across his last 3 fights, and he's fighting. Okay, let's make sure I get the right one here. Do Choi? Am I right there, Sean? No, I'm sorry. You just mentioned.
No, I just gave it. Yeah,
Sung-Woo Choi. Yeah, that's what threw me off. We're both betting on Choi's to get finished in this one, just different ones. He's fighting Sung-Woo Choi, who has been knocked down 5 times in his last 3 fights. I've talked about it on here before. I kind of think knockdowns to knockouts are one of those regression type things. Like it's kind of like batting average on balls in play in baseball, where it should equalize over a long enough time period based on the refs you get and the fight IQ of the person trying to finish you and all those other things, where Choi has only been finished once in those 3 fights, and he's won 1 of the 3, but he's been knocked down 5 times across them, been knocked down in each of them, and against far less dangerous strikers than Steve Garcia, who's just out here flattening people and looks like one of the best power punchers, at least in the division. The price difference between inside the distance and knockout is not that much. I'm always scared that somebody gets dropped, gets clipped, and then he dives on a rear naked, and that's how we finish it, instead of the knockout, which is probably why I'd go that way. But if you want to get greedy, get extra 25 cents of payout on that, the knockout at plus 125 makes sense too.
Fight is minus 300 to end via KO and like minus 400 to end inside the distance. So yeah, I think you pick the side you like and bet the finish props. And I would have loved to have bet the ends KO at like even minus 150 here, but it's far too juiced.
Yeah.
As far as best bets are concerned, or these final bets, I have a feeling what Billy's going to say, but Zerillo?
Best bet. I love Bruno Silva this week. So took him at even money. I probably would take him up to about minus 115, even minus 120. And I also like Bruno Silva to win inside the distance at plus 120. This is flyweight Bruno Silva, not middleweight Bruno Silva. We have both in the UFC, but Bruno Silva lost his first 3 UFC fights. Really tough competition. Has come back and proven himself against lesser fighters. He's Henry Cejudo's former chief training partner. He ended up moving camps recently to ATT, and this is an ATT versus ATT fight. Him and Cody Durden are training partners. By all accounts, Bruno Silva took the fight first, and Cody Durden didn't want to take the fight and then accepted the fight. So that may tell you as much as you need to know, considering these guys have trained together, and one was very willing to take the fight, and the other was a little bit more hesitant to take the fight. But if this was just a pure grappling match, Durden is the better wrestler, and he has better cardio to wrestle for 15 minutes, just like pure wrestling. But Silva is the better jiu-jitsu practitioner. I think he's the better overall grappler, and he's clearly the better striker. So advantages for me in 2 out of the 3 areas of MMA: better grappler, better striking. Durden, if he just wants to wrestle and try to stay on the legs and try to make this greasy and try to tire Silva out, I think he's capable of doing so. But when it comes down to the judging optics, it's going to be Durden going for control, going for takedowns, maybe occasionally hunting for a submission attempt, but Silva is going to be prioritizing damage throughout the fight, whether he's on his back, whether he's scrambling to get up and return to the feet and keep striking. And I think he is significantly more finishing upside as well. I projected this fight to end inside the distance more than 50% of the time, or about 50% of the time. You can get the end inside the distance at plus 135, get the under 2.5 rounds at plus 165. I think those are both solid plays too, but I would put more of the finishing equity with Silva. So that's why I bet his finish prop in particular, but I wouldn't fault you for just taking the under here. This should be a high-paced, relatively chaotic fight. I tend to like flyweight unders. You look at the career finish rate for men's flyweight, as I discussed earlier, women's strawweight, like a 66% decision rate. Men's flyweight goes to decision at a 54% clip. So it's a bit higher than you'd think, but it's actually even with like the featherweights. So for some reason, men's flyweight, like the speed is at a higher rate, where I think it leads to more finishes than you would expect. There's like every weight class you move down, the finish rates decrease, except then you get to 145, 135, 125, and there's sort of a plateau. So there's something about the flyweights with the speed where it just leads to more chaos and more finishes. But I think Silva, if I had to define him as a fighter, he's definitely a finisher, and I like him to get it done inside the distance here. So plus 240 inside the distance. Don't really want to choose between submission or KO. And I really like his money line up to about minus 115 as well.
Okay. And I think that's the current number right now out there on Silva. That money, it's moved to minus 115 away from the plus 100. Okay, Billy, final bet, best bet?
No, I think I'm going to surprise you here, although I'm not sure which one you meant. This is actually a best bet for me.
Oh, I thought final bet for sure, because you did work because to the card earlier that you were wondering if people would watch, but I don't know.
No, I think this is actually a much better betting card than watching card, is the question you used to ask us sometimes.
All right.
Agreed.
There's a lot of fairly close line fight. And you can bet minus 130 against Kurt Hollabaugh, which I will take without any other information. If you tell me Kurt Hollabaugh is fighting a guy who's been in the UFC before and we can get minus 130 against him, I'm going to take that. Another one of these guys coming off a recent season of The Ultimate Fighter. Hollabaugh is officially 1-5 in the UFC across 2 stints. His only win was the finale of The Ultimate Fighter against another guy who wasn't really a UFC fighter, right? Kind of like we were talking about with Yija and the road to the UFC. It was like their way into the UFC didn't really make them actual UFC fighters. Hubbard came back and won a fight against Michael Figlak, some guy that nobody's ever heard of. We could play the what happened next game forever. I just haven't seen it from Kurt Hollabaugh at this level. Kenan Khrushchevsky lost his UFC debut, but he came up a weight class on short notice against Elvis Brenner and got knocked out. Every time we've seen him other than that, he's looked awesome. He's 4 years younger, so not exactly a young guy at 33, but starting to matter, right, when we have 33 versus 37. Seems to be the better athlete, more toolsy, more dangerous, finished the vast majority of his fights. He has just 2 decision wins in his 15 total wins, where Hollabaugh is, largely speaking, I would say more of a point fighter or picks up submissions off his back. that's not a great way to be against anyone with decent grappling, because they're either not going to put you there or just not give you anything to look for. So all things considered, you give me that opportunity to bet against Kurt Holloway. We're not going to have many of them. He's 37 and 1-5 in the UFC. I'm going to take it at -130.
All right. Excellent. There you go. There's your UFC Fight Night breakdown. They're back at the Apex in Las Vegas this coming weekend. Again, you can catch the main card on ESPN, and the prelims are on ESPN2 just beforehand on Saturday night. Find Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward in the free-to-download, award-winning Action Network app. We have more UFC betting content over on the Action Network website, actionnetwork.com, in the app as well. Best of luck this weekend, folks. For Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, we'll catch you next time here on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.